Hi everyone, right, homeward straight, almost finished, everyone's still awake. Bit of a recurring theme, if you've got enough grey hair, you'll remember the days under the bedclothes at night with your pocket radio listening to Late Night Luxembourg and Late Night Caroline or even John Peel. If you haven't got grey hair, you'll wonder what the hell I'm talking about. In the beginning, we'll do a little bit of history lesson first so you know where we got to today. They say life began at sea before it moved on land. And that's where it started. Radio started at sea. Almost. Quick history lesson then. Late 1950s, got a teenage culture had suddenly come along. The invention of a portable transistor radio. Imagine that. You could carry music around in the palm of your hand. Rock and roll music had arrived, and the youth had got spending power. Early 1960s, what could you hear on the radio? You got the BBC Home Service. You had the BBC Light programme. You had the imaginatively named BBC Third programme. 2 to 3 hours a week of pop music, which was Alan Freeman on a Saturday night. Most music on the Light service was in-house BBC musicians, the BBC Northern Dance Orchestra, playing their rendition of the latest song from the Beatles. Wasn't very exciting. 1962, the government has a committee, governments love committees. Pilkington Committee looked at broadcasting. BBC was told to introduce a second television service called BBC Two. They determined there was no public demand for more than 3 BBC radio services. There was absolutely no demand whatsoever for commercial radio or even pop music on the radio. It was a waste of time. Who wanted pop music? The average age of a committee member, I feel a bit guilty about saying this now, was 55. What did they know about the 18-year-olds and the baby boomers? 1963, the Beatles hit their first #1 song. The Rolling Stones were about 6 months behind. They had their first chart entry. The most popular radio station in the UK was Radio Luxembourg. Fading in and out at night, broadcasting for 6 hours in the evening. Programs were 15 minutes long, sponsored by individual record companies. So you had the Decca Records 15 minutes. They would play you a little snippet of 30 seconds from each of the latest releases from Decca Records. You'd have the 15 minutes of the Phillips hour. Offshore radio stations by 1963, already on air from Denmark from 1958. They were years ahead of us. Sweden from 1960 and the Netherlands from 1962. There was a lot of people in southern England were listening to Radio Veronica in 1962. So it all changed Easter 1964. After a few false starts, an Irish gentleman, Ronan O'Reilly, finally got Caroline out to sea, got the money involved, got the backers. Radio Caroline launches from off the coast of Essex, and the 60s are about to start swinging. Britpop, the original Britpop, is about to explode. Millions of bands are about to burst onto the scene and take the world. The government and the BBC are fuming, but the public are tuning in by the millions. Within about 3 months, they reckon 18 million people will listen to this one radio station from the North Sea. End of 1964, there was 4 stations on air. By 1967, 11 stations had been on air or had come and gone. The government attempts to bring in a law to restrict offshore broadcasting in 1967. All the other stations closed down apart from Caroline. Johnny Walker, in a famous moment, said, "Caroline continues. The government are not going to tell us what to do." Caroline continued past 1967. Nowadays, this kind of spirit, it would be called move fast and break things, and it would be rewarded as being entrepreneurs. One government minister at the time said, if the working man is provided with entertainment on his wireless set at breakfast time, he will be disinclined to go into work. Remember that next time you're listening to your peak-rated breakfast program. Don't keep the working man from going to work. Caroline Era 1, 1964 to 1968. 2 ships, one in the Thames, one off the Isle of Man. Era 2, Caroline relaunched 1972 off the coast of Holland. That ended up at the bottom of the Thames in 1980. It's not a good way to treat your radio station. What do you do when you've reached rock bottom? You come back bigger and better than ever. 1983, Caroline went into Era 3. Tallest mast ever on a ship. It should be in the Guinness Book of Records, but they refused to recognize it. For a while during the 1980s, there was 3 separate stations on the ship. An English service, a Dutch service, and a religious service on shortwave that brought in lots of sponsored programming. That all came to an end one stormy night. Stormy nights feature quite strongly in Caroline history. There she is, high and dry on the Goodwin Sands in November 1991. Pulled into Dover by tugs. Ship was arrested. the supporters group all came together to rescue the ship, to refit it, and look to what could be done in the future. So Era 4 is a new technology. In 1991, the first satellite broadcast from Caroline came out. Bear in mind, Sky had only launched in 1990, and 1991 was also the era of the BSB square reels. Who remembers BSB square reels? Oh, you all do. Excellent. Good. You're not as young as I thought you were. 1997, Caroline puts the first website online. There's downloadable programs. Bear in mind, 1997, you're lucky if you had a 32 kilobit dial-up modem. I think it would take you about 4 hours to download a half-hour program. 1998, there were some DAB transmissions went out on the London Experimental DAB. I think it was 1998. I can't remember. I was desperately looking online the other day. I can't remember if Nathan or any of the Archiva guys can remember when the London Experimental DAB multiplex, which was the predecessor to London 1, actually launched. But Caroline had some programs going out on there. 1998, we did a first full-time permanent service Europe-wide on the Astra 19 satellite. There's a BSB square reel. Sorry, I've gone through all that just to remind you what a square reel looked like. Era 4, 2001, World Space came along. Portable radio, looked like a perfectly normal shortwave, medium wave, FM portable radio, little pop-up satellite dish. You could take that anywhere, Africa, Middle East, Europe. Listen to Caroline on it. Also joined over the years by Virgin Radio, TalkSport, BBC World Service. Absolutely fantastic technology. Nobody wanted to pay for it, though. Bear in mind, 2001 started live streaming of Caroline. BT had only just launched ADSL broadband. 2002, we went digital on satellite service. 2004, first programs live streamed from the Ross Revenge during an RSL for 28 days. Nobody said you could run live streaming programs for 28 days on an ADSL circuit back then. Somehow we managed it. We had about 10 drops in 28 days, so we were quite impressed with that. Bear in mind, in ADSL was 512K up and 256 down. Sorry, other way around, and we were streaming at 128K and using that for web browsing and email and everything at the same time. 2007, launched with Sky Digital Service. 2010, everyone thinks Caroline finished, you see, years ago. It always kept going. Long-time Caroline presenter Bob Lawrence enlists help from Tracy Couch, who's the MP in the DCMS, to campaign to Ofcom to allow Caroline for an AM community station, as services at that time were starting to cut back on AM services. Some BBC local services had already gone. It was fairly obvious that was the way it was going. Say, nobody wants AM, why can't we use it? Tracy Crouch raised an early day motion in Parliament, supported, I think it was by something like 60 MPs or something, eventually signed that. Whether it had any influence, we don't know. 2012, BBC World Service shut down their World Service for Europe medium wave service, which broadcast from the Suffolk coast. They had a 2 million watt transmitter that covered most of Europe. That was through financial cutbacks. There are some discussions as to whether Ofcom should release those BBC frequencies for community radio use or not. That's what Orphan Nest transmitter site looks like. Strangely enough, Caroline feels at home when it was flooded and it was underwater. If you've got an offshore radio station, that's about as close to offshore as you can get. It's not normally underwater. 2015, Babcock Networks, who were then managing BBC World Service transmissions, and the BBC disposed of the Orphan Nest transmitter site. They sell it to 2 local businessmen who operate the site under Cobra Mist Limited. These 2 gentlemen are interested in Cold War history and preservation of military things. They lived locally. They purchased the site. Cobra Mist was a top secret NATO name given to the over-the-horizon radar system that was based on this site in the 1960s, and that was to track Soviet missiles. 2016, Ofcom announced they're going to have an application for a further round of community licenses. 2017, Caroline gets a license. Hooray, 1 kilowatt of power. We were quite pleased with that. Most community stations get 50 watts or 100 watts. We managed to get a kilowatt. Thank you, Ofcom. And also in 2015, Caroline launched on 8 of the SS small-scale DAB services. Always at the front, leading the way. So that's where Orphan Nest is, about as close to offshore as you can get. That's a bit more of a zoom in, and that is the site. What you can actually see is there's, let me do that one. 5 towers, which is the original 648 antenna, and there was a standby antenna which we're using. You can also see here, you can see lines across the ground. and they are actually where the original curtain arrays for the radar system were, and they would scan around looking for reflections. Think about sending out a radio signal, bouncing off the atmosphere twice, looking for something the size of a missile flying above Finland and getting a reflection from it. It's quite advanced what NATO were doing in those days. Anyway, December 2017, Caroline launches on AM. Who in their right mind is going to launch an AM service playing music in 2017? We thought, well, a few hundred people will listen to it, 1,000 people might listen to it. We were blown away by the reaction. Our 1 kilowatt transmitter, we were paying at the time 15 pence a kilowatt hour. It cost about 250 quid a month in electricity. For a community radio station, that wasn't bad. That was quite a reasonable operating cost. We weren't happy with a kilowatt. We asked Ofcom nicely and put in a few applications. We got an increase to 4 kilowatts. Fantastic. That quadrupled, or more than quadrupled, the electricity bill. Summer 2022, Ukraine war, electricity goes up by 3 times within a space of a couple of months. Suddenly, our electricity bill has gone from 250 quid a month to about £3,000 a month for a service that gets most of its money in from listeners as donations and selling a little bit of advertising. That's a significant amount of money. We had investigated solar power earlier, thought, could we do this? Would it be a nice project to try? So we thought, yeah, let's go for it. So initially investigated solar power in 2021. We obtained a few proposals and quotes. By early summer 2022, we decided to go ahead. Good idea. We went back to one of the quotes, or all the quotes, and they said, oh, prices have gone up by like 25% or 30% because electricity costs have gone up, therefore the world demand for solar panels has gone up. So anyway, we announced our plans during the summer of 2022. August each year, we have annual fundraising, which is where we go to the listeners and say, this is what we would like to do for the next year, send your money in. We thought, let's see how many listeners want to send money in for solar panel. Everyone supported it. We published your targets, lots of money came in, thought, great, we've got the capital investment now to spend on it, so we got an enthusiastic response. Told the contractor to go ahead in January 2023, on-site installation early spring. We signed up for 63 400-watt panels, which is about 25 kilowatts of generation, and that's got a 20 kilowatt three-phase inverter on it. What it means is the inverter is at full 20 kilowatts capacity when we've got about 80% sunshine. The whole site, because it's right on the coast, is actually built on stilts, about 12 feet above ground level, and that is the level of the 1953 North Sea floods. And when NATO built the site, they wanted it above the flood level. So we have this huge concrete plinth that's just right, 12 feet above ground, that we can actually mount the solar panels on. And as you can see, there's satellite dishes on there as well. Solar companies are used to putting panels on house roofs, so we had to go to 2 or 3 companies to find somebody who was interested in this as a project. The panels are actually on big plastic tubs. They look like grit bins at the side of the road, and they're full of gravel and hardcore to actually hold them down, stop them blowing away, and the panels are mounted on that. It does actually make them quite easy to rotate, which we'll come back to later. Various options for solar technology. You can have a grid-tied inverter, which is synchronized to the incoming main supply. Your excess generation, you then export back to the grid. Technically, it requires an import-export meter, and you have to set a tariff with your electricity company so they pay you for what you're generating. You can be off-grid or off-grid with battery storage, which is a completely standalone system not connected to the grid. Or you can be grid-tied with battery storage, in which case your excess generation you store in batteries, and then you can use that battery power overnight. A lot of domestic installations are going towards grid-tied with battery storage. But that wasn't really going to suit us because our demand was fairly constant. Now, we get asked various questions. Some of them are like, how do you switch from solar power to mains power? Is there a changeover switch that when the sun's shining, it goes clonk and changes over? We also got asked, and never worked out if it was a serious question or not, would the signal be louder on days when the sun is shining? But you're never quite sure whether these questions are true or not. So this is an analogy we came up with to explain this to people. Imagine this as water pipes, and these are water meters. You've got a big fat water pipe coming into the landlord's building. They've got a couple of other sub-users on there. The landlord uses his own supply. We've got our supply meter, and then we've got our inverter. If the inverter is producing water, it might be a small trickle of water, but at a high enough pressure. If that flow, if the sun is shining and the inverter is generating enough power, that pressure and flow of the water will eventually start to feed our transmitter system and stop any meter current flowing through our supply meter. If we generate more power and the flow of water and the pressure is slightly higher, we'll backfeed through our meter and then start supplying the other users on site, who the landlord is still charging electricity for because it's going through their meters. And if we're producing lots and lots of power on a really good sunny day, we're actually backfeeding through the landlord's meter and feeding back into the grid supply. When our meter when we're backfeeding through the meter, our meter doesn't register anything, so we pay for what we take from the landlord, but we give them our excess for free. That's what the Huawei 20 kilowatt inverter looks like. It's just a box on a wall, 3 strings of solar panels coming in, each with a DC isolator. They're coming at about 400, 500 volts DC, 3-phase isolator going out, and you can also plug an Ethernet Wi-Fi module into it, which on a Huawei inverter, the man from the company was telling me, well, you get it on your phone and you can do all this with your phone apps. I said, yeah, but the phone isn't connected to that, it's connecting back to a server in China, and that machine is connecting to a server in China. And I said, I don't want that, I just want control of it, please. That's our supply billing. I don't see why we should tell the Chinese how much electricity we're generating from sun. That's our conventional meter. That's what we get billed on. This is our solar generation meter. 17 kilowatts works out about 5.6 kilowatts per phase, 5.7, 230 volts per phase, 23 amps per phase. So that's a fairly reasonably sunny day at 17 kilowatts. You've probably seen it on the website. I took this about 9 o'clock at night over the weekend, which is reading 0, but we have up on the top of the website there our solarometer. As a listener finance station, we want to show the listeners what we've actually done and how we've spent their money and that this solar is actually working. So you see that on a nice sunny day, it'll sit at 20 kilowatts. Yesterday, a grey November day, it was about 2 kilowatts. Saturday was quite a bright sunny November day. It was on about 8 kilowatts. So it's what we call the sunshinometer. And then people ask, how does that work? Well, the meter is the generation meter. That's on a Modbus connection, RS485 connection into a Modbus TCP converter. That sits on our on-site Ethernet. We have a PC on site which is running a routine that polls across Modbus over IP, gets a reading from there, sends that reading out. We've got to have a dark cloud for a solar system. Got to have a cloud in every presentation. So if we're talking solar, we'll have a dark cloud. Sends it to an SQL database. I've got no idea where that is. That's picked up by a web server. That puts it on the web page. Believe it or not, we said, we know how we want to do this. How are we going to do it? And I thought I could sit down forever to play with Modbus. We put an advert on the main website saying, wanted Modbus expert, must understand Modbus HTML, web browsing, PHP, blah. We had about 4 or 5 people came back to us. I gave a brief spec to all the people, said, this is what we're looking for. One guy came back and said, I've done almost exactly the same. In about 2 days, he sent me an application through which we loaded onto the PC. Apart from the fact we were reading watts instead of kilowatts, and it was 1,000 out, and also we had a negative figure because we were generating power, it worked first time. It took two reiterations of software to get the thing working and onto the web page. Does it work? Definitely. On a sunny day, we get 7 to 8 hours of full powered transmission, including export back to the grid. Cloudy days, 2 to 3 kilowatts. We costed it originally as 6 to 8 years payback time. At 2022 prices with electricity going up 3-fold, 4-fold, we reckon it could pay back 3 or 4 years. Financed by listener donations, so that makes our listeners feel they had a part to play. Our landlords get benefit of the excess generation which they sell to the other tenants on site, or they reduces their own electricity bill for what they're using on site. The cost of the whole system is about £1 per watt. 25 kilowatts of panels and the inverter, it cost us about £25,000 for the installation. Lessons learned. When you get a quote, don't sit around once electricity prices go up. Buy them immediately. Find a company who are interested in doing something different. If the company only want to bolt panels on the side of somebody's house or talk about feed-in tariffs and how much money you'll make from it, don't believe them. You want a company who says, oh yeah, that sounds like a nice challenge. And if you're on the edge of an RSPB bird sanctuary and it's nesting season, keep a bucket of water and some mops handy because you get solar attenuators quite frequently. Future plans, put an extra 5 kilowatts to maximize the inverter. That would allow us to be fully powered on what we call a 30% sun day. Want to reorientate some of the panels to move them, but the installers install it to do absolute peak maximum output, whereas we actually want to have 12 kilowatts output over the best part of the day, so we want to turn some of the panels further around. We want to add some widgets onto the website to show some facts and statistics. How many hours did we do yesterday? All this kind of stuff. It's all in an SQL database. As a volunteer organisation, we've got 2 or 3 people saying, yeah, we'll do that, but no one's got around to it yet, so that will hopefully come up. And maybe possibly look at battery storage. Does AM radio have a future? It's a reliable, simple technology. It's falling out of favour. It has drawbacks. It has advantages. There's a big resurgence of AM in Ukraine and in Russia and Belarus, trying to get cross-border broadcasts through where there's firewalls and all that kind of stuff. US government has legislated for AM to be in all car radios because manufacturers were dropping it and people were complaining. No longer used for national and public broadcasters. Could you do a new band plan? Could you allow some more experimentation? Not sure. Nice sonar image of the original ship at the bottom of the sea. With new technologies, DRM, CQAM, better audio quality. Caroline's future, 60 years on. Is there another 60 years to go, hopefully? It's a crowded environment nowadays. Everyone can do something different. We'd love to have more power from Ofcom. Please, Ofcom. We'll keep applying until we wear you down and you give in, you just say yes. Try to innovate, keep your listeners involved, make your listeners feel part of the organisation, and spread the word. Thank you. Questions?